This one goes out to the Artcasters. Ooh, Artcasters! I see you catching your spell, Artcasters. Catching your spell. Ooh, you're gonna cast that spell. Strike a hell. Whoa! Ooh. Hi, 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 hi.
All right, welcome to Artcasters episode 455, and we are joined by a special guest. And I just, as I was right after I hit go live, realized I hadn't added the special guest name to the title because, for those of you who don't know, our special guest is one of the OG Artcasters, and so but I just revised it. So now, if you guys look at YouTube, refresh your screens, boom, it's going to say with special guest Cory Kerr.
I feel like this is like an episode of Saturday Night Live where, as a former cast member that's come back to host the show. So
yeah, that's true. That's true. We got to do a bit and then live from Saturday night or whatever. From New York City.
I've got a monologue prepared.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
It's good. Yeah.
I like how my quote, I am so sleep deprived that I was going to go live from Saturday night. It's New York.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so let's kick off the topic. So, first we got to introduce ourselves. I'm just excited to talk about this, especially with Bert and Scott too, because I think we'll probably arrive at a really interesting thing. Okay. Let's make the rounds. If you guys have arrived here, you're on my channel. So hit subscribe, hit the bell to get notifications when we go live and all that stuff. And, if you like my new look with glasses, get used to it because I'm old. So these are permanent now. Once you see with glasses, when your eyesight starts going, the world is a haze without them, and it's kind of shocking that you went so long. And by you, I mean me. That's basically it. So if you haven't yet, consider buying Jacob's Apartment, 2 stories, my 2 graphic novels, or listening to some rock and roll music under that name. Not that name. On all music streaming platforms. Scott, where can everybody find your stuff? If I'm a connoisseur of all things 80s and really miss like late 70s, early 80s. I miss those beautiful wax pack cards. Where can I get them? Want to learn about comics? I have all these things I want to do. Where do I go, Scott?
Well, the first place you can go is my YouTube channel. Just search Circworks Art Labs on YouTube. I've got videos up there of me creating crazy stuff from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then I also have my series, Making Comics 101. It's the most comprehensive course on how to make comics, free course anyway, that you're going to find anywhere. It's on my YouTube channel. So there's just tons of stuff, over 1,000 videos on how to make comics and how to just make cool vintage style stuff. Check that stuff out on my YouTube channel. I also have a website, circworks.com is where you can find those wax packs that Josh mentioned. So just like old school wax packs of movies and TV shows that they never made wax packs. So if you don't know what wax packs are, they're trading cards wrapped in wax, bubblegum cards. You probably remember that. Also, I have digital products that help you make comics better, faster, more efficiently. I've got prints, all kinds of stuff on my store, including my comic book, Young and the Dead. It's a kids versus zombie adventure story. And I'm just going to let people know, just be on the lookout. I will be announcing a Kickstarter soon for that final issue and the collected issue. So if you have all the previous issues and you want that final one, you'll be able to get that. Or if you don't have any of them, you'll be able to get the trade. Or maybe you just want both. I don't know. But I will be letting people know. But just so you know, it's coming soon. So be aware of that. And that's pretty much all I've got to pimp out today. So.
Awesome. Welcome to Drink the Paint Water. Just joined. He said, woot woot, evening friends. Evening
Hey,
Drink
Jason.
the Paint Water. We got Paul Pate joining us too. He said,
Hey, Paul.
I got glasses at age 16 when I failed the eye test while trying to get my driver's license. I'm guessing that I have to renew my license this year, and I'm guessing I would have had that experience in my 40s, which wouldn't be quite as fun as 16. Anyhow, so also, Scott, every time you say better, faster, more productive or something, I always think of, I don't know if you're familiar with Radiohead, but on OK Computer, the first song starts with fitter, happier, more productive. Like those 3 lines. Anyhow, it makes me think of that because I'm a nerd. Cory, where can everybody check out your beautiful work if they are fans of amazing stories, anamorphic stories that tell parables that apply to society today? Where can they go to fill that need?
You can go to CoryKerr.com.
Not anamorphic, anthropomorphic. Man. Anyway, sorry.
Anthropomorphic personification. I actually recently looked up the difference between those two. I think it's personification and not anthropomorphic. But anyway, I got glasses when I was 12 years old, and I tore my retina in half playing football and went blind from the half up. And then I had to have laser eye surgery to like cauterize the wound to seal it back up. So I have been wearing...
That does not surprise me at all.
Yeah, so
I feel like Cory's life has been a cascade of moments of like near-death experiences. I just imagine when this happened, your parents being like, "Yep, yeah, that makes sense. Yep."
Yeah. So yesterday, my youngest daughter Roz, she is constantly falling off of things and hitting her head, and my wife is very concerned. She's like, "Oh," and I said, I think you have to understand that, like, my dad, I was his oldest, and my dad just had a running phrase literally every time I would get hurt, where he would say, "Well, he would have been the valedictorian." Like, it was so common for me to fall down and hit my head that I'm just like, she's just a chip off the old block. I think she'll be fine. So, but anyway, you can go to CoryKerr.com. If you go there, it is very difficult to not go to my comic. There's a giant banner right here you can click on. There's a big red button right here you can click on. There's a collapsible button that gives you a little description you can click on, and there's a menu that you can click on. And any of those will take you here, and you can kind of read these. And if you scroll down just a little bit, you can subscribe right there and get notifications for when I launch new pages, because I am doing this the least financially viable way possible, where I am giving it away for free, one page at a time as I finish them. So
I love it.
So you can jump on there and pretend like it's 2012 and webcomics are still cool.
Hey, webcomics are still cool. I know what's hip. Okay, my Riz brother. Okay. Speaking of what's cool, I'm going to talk about something completely uncool. This morning at like 2 a.m, I was in a conundrum, and I had like 3 things I had to do. One was I had to do this assignment for technology for teachers class that's at the college. And by the way, the college classes take a long time. I forgot, but it's like none of the work's been hard, but it's been time consuming and thought consuming, which is the fun part. But the time consuming, not so much. And then I had to do revisions for a client, and I also had to, I hadn't live streamed in a while. And then I realized, I can do all 3, because the assignment kind of ended up a live stream would work for that. And then I could get the revisions for the client done. So I killed 3 birds with 1 stone. But I'm revising this illustration for a client, and the illustration was the assignment was another one of those book covers I did for No Starch Press. And this one, they wanted ants putting together components on a chip, like a computer chip.
Aren't they called?
And then the revision was just to add like take out less ants, because I made it too literal, where it was like a whole group of ants like doing every component. But anyhow, so I'm revising these ants, and I'm realizing this is fun, but the guy to draw this, there's a guy I know who could knock this out of the park way better than me. So that's one thing. So that made me want to talk to Cory, because I was like, wow, drawing ants makes me think of Cory. Because if you guys don't know, Rage of Enlightenment is a lot of insects, and really well drawn ones. So, but then I also have been thinking about Cory a lot lately, because I had to write a more official teaching philosophy paper. One of the things that a lot of people don't mention about college is quite often when you teach college, you're kind of thrown into a classroom without a lot of like learning about pedagogy or philosophy. So when you write your teaching philosophy paper to apply for like college positions, it's weird because a lot of it's like kind of talking to other college professors, your own reading, your own research and stuff like that. But you rarely are taking classes about teaching classes before you teach college, right? What's interesting about the teaching high school in retrospect is that I've been having to take a lot of classes where it gets into the philosophy and like teaching techniques and stuff like that, which is actually pretty cool. I kind of am appreciating that because I've already learned some things, you know? Anyhow, that's the most long-winded intro to the topic. But that also made me think of Cory, because I had to write a teaching philosophy paper, and it was kind of breaking down from the 5 main teaching philosophies and where you kind of align, you know? Mm-hmm. And that made me think about art and education, and then that mixed with somebody who was watching my stream early this morning, one of the 3 people who watched it at like 2 in the morning, asked me if art school was worth it. And it got me thinking about art school. It got me thinking about art education. It got me thinking about teaching philosophies, what we think about the best methods to like learn and teach art, and then also whether it's worthwhile to like pursue art as a degree, or as like a institutionally or even non-institutionally, just pursue art being educated about art. So that's the tee off for a very complicated topic. So I thought I've been thinking about all these things, and I can't think of somebody I know better than Cory to have that conversation with, you know. And then Scott, obviously, as well, because I mean, Scott has done a lot of mentorship. He's done the most comprehensive breakdown of comic. Like, if you want to learn how to do comics, watch Scott's channel, right? He breaks it down from like in every component, one of the best ways I've ever seen done. And then obviously Cory's been teaching, you know, visual communication for a long time. And it's funny because when I mentioned, hey, the topic's teaching art, Cory's like, well, I don't really teach art. I teach visual communication. And I'm like, well, what is art? You know, like like, I don't know. To me, the two are more analogous than people like. And I think they get split into factions. But at the end of the day, like even graphic design all started with an illustrator drawing, you know, letters. So I think there's a lot. If you're visually communicating, you're doing art.
I agree, but I think a square is always a rectangle, but a rectangle isn't always a square. And I think there's a distinction, and the distinction for me is I'm in the College of Business and Communication, and so when I am talking about the Gestalt principles, the design principles, color theory, typography, I'm talking about how do you use these things to help a business make money, to promote their ideas, their brand, to get the messaging across. And so it's a very applied situation to a very specific creative brief. Whereas outside of that, I can make art for fun. I drew that because I wanted to draw it. You know, I animated that because I thought it would be entertaining. And while I do believe that there's messaging in both, the distinction is made very clear to me every day by other people in the building that are teaching art, and and it's a little bit of this kind of like tug of war, territorial pissing match sometimes. So,
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like writing. There's English creative writing, there's business technical writing, there's engineering writing, there's financial writing, there's PR writing, there's advertising copy. It's all putting words on a page, but the way that you're doing it and the reasons that you're doing it drastically differ. And how you think about those types of things are really important. And so, anyway, that was my only hesitation. Is
I don't. That's reasonable.
I don't technically teach capital A art.
Yeah.
So,
and I do think it's an important distinction. Like I think it gets arbitrary when you start breaking down like a lot of labels, right? But it is important to kind of define terms before getting in a conversation. It's like, if I say art, what do I mean by art, right? What do you mean by visual communication? Defining those things. And I love that idea of the difference being art can have multiple intents, whereas you're kind of in a scenario where it's a pretty specific intent, right?
Yeah, you got a creative brief, you get a specific audience or whatever.
Yeah, and you're trying to make money. That's okay. So, cool. Chris Kawagu is joining us. Keeman's joining us. Paul said I look more like Jim Mahfood every day. Do I look like Jim Mahfood?
You're getting there.
It must be the glasses.
Yeah.
It's the glasses, and your beard's a little bit heavier and thicker than you wear it sometimes.
Well, I will admit this about glasses, okay? The second my eyesight was bad, I'm like, all right, I'm getting Buddy Holly's. Like, there's no question. Like, it's like my whole life. I'm like, if I ever had to wear glasses, I'm wearing Buddy Holly's. And finally, at my old age, I have an excuse to wear them. The other thing I'm realizing is how annoying. I didn't realize like how often people with glasses, like these are those nice lenses that don't scratch. It's the frames are just like cheap, whatever my insurance company would cover, But the lenses, like my wife who's wearing glasses forever was like, get the no scratch, because she was like, you'll pretty much scratch the lens like first day if you don't. And I was like, oh, okay. Being cheap, I was like, nah, I'm not going to. But then I thought about it. She's wearing these a long time. Now I'm glad I did, because, I can see how that happens. Because you have to, like, wipe your glasses, like, at least once every hour, It's wild. Yeah, I didn't expect that, like the smudges and stuff that show up.
And you might not have this problem because of where you live, but I'd recommend looking into contacts, too.
Yeah. Oh, I would imagine in Idaho you'd have like frames just freeze and crack,
Yeah,
That's wild. Yeah. Or fog up,
There's 6 months of the year it's not even worth wearing glasses because you can't see out of them anyway.
I wear contacts, so these are reading glasses, but
yeah.
The only thing that's weird is if Cory, tell me if you wear contacts, Cory.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing that's sometimes weird is that, like, if you go to open the oven and it's super hot, it feels like they melt to your eyes. Do you ever have that?
I do every other night as I get into my 185 degree sauna.
Yeah.
I love it. Paul said Clark Kent, and then Chris was saying Josh in glasses and full beard is like he's in disguise. I have been thinking about that. Like, technically, I do kind of look like if I took my glasses off, my nose could come with it. Like Groucho Marx kind of scenario. I actually was thinking it would be fun to have some prescription Groucho Marx glasses that have the little mustache and fake nose. Anyhow. Okay, that's
Coyote. I think Coyote. I'm assuming that's how. He's asking if we all went to art school.
Yes.
So that might be. Yeah. So, Josh, you got an MFA.
Yeah.
Which is more of a master's. That is a terminal degree that's equivalent to a PhD.
Yeah.
In this field, and Scott, you did school, but I can't remember how much you completed.
I got a couple of certificates. Basically, my goal was just I'm going to take every single art class I can, and so I set out to do that. And then through that course, I got offered a job, and then I just got the 2 certificates just so I'd have something that would, if in case I wanted to go back, which I never really did, but
Yeah.
I pretty much consider every day like school, because I'm always learning how to do things. So,
and
Yeah, and then
I think that'll be fun to get into too, because I think that's a really good route to go sometimes. We'll get into like more into the nitty gritty. And then Cory, you want to explain kind of your scenario with sort of like initial, and then the change.
Yeah, I worked for 14 years after my bachelor's degree, doing marketing and art direction and all kinds of different things. And then to teach, I needed to get a master's, and so I got a master's when I was like 34 or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been about 10 years now.
Yeah. So you were in almost like a similar position to me, where like why I'm in college right now is to keep the gig I have now,
Yes.
to get the credential, even though I have like all the other stuff. So
exactly the same. They were like, "We love you, and if you want to stay here, you have to go do this thing." And I was like, "Okay."
Yeah.
So my art school came, a decade and a half after doing it for years.
See, I think that's a good variety of stuff, because like, we all kind of come from different frameworks of art education. I think we'll probably get into it, but like I think probably positives and negatives of all three.
Mm-hmm.
But okay. So I have a couple things. I want to tee off the topic now from 20 minutes in, because I'm rambling. Pedagogy is just like your philosophy on teaching. Like, it's like, what do you think? How do you think people should be taught? Right?
I'm glad you specify what that is, because I didn't know what pedagogy was.
Yeah. Well, that's why nobody uses that in common parlance. And one of the things that always annoys me about academia is once people learn terms that aren't commonly used, they'll just throw them around like, without explaining when they're saying it. And it's kind of like a snarky way to use the terms, which always annoys me. It's like I ended up talking about like monochrome and breaking that term down for my students the other day, because I was like, monochromatic is not like a weird big word. It's just one, like chroma is color, mono is one, right? I always hate when people don't break stuff down, because it feels like a power move that's dumb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My favorite thing is to toss in words like pedagogical.
Yeah.
When you could just say how.
Yeah.
Like
exactly.
The pedagogical reason for doing this is like how I'm doing this is.
Yeah. It's just like your method. Yeah.
Yeah, and I only do that if I'm like in a room full of PhDs as a way to like mock everyone else in the room.
I love that. So, but the reason I'm bringing that up is, I think it's important, like when we're talking about like art and education, how do we think art should be taught is kind of like, I guess, what I'm kind of thinking. And so what I wanted to say to tee it off is, back in the day, like for most of human history, the way artists worked was a lot like a lot of other careers, where you had like a master and apprentice,
Yeah.
And so you'd have a guy who spent his life apprenticing under like an oil painter or something like that. And they would pick up the tricks of the trade while also doing some of the grunt work around the studio, right? So you'd kind of like, if you were a young up and coming artist, you'd volunteer, you'd spend time at the studio of this master, you'd probably like, work your way up to like mixing paint, and then finally, like after observing the technique and practicing and having mentorship, like where they're looking over your shoulder while you're working and, kind of fixing stuff. Eventually you kind of work your way up to becoming a practitioner and then a master yourself. So that's been the master and apprentice method's been like the majority of art throughout time. That's not to say it's right, because so has most things. Like Cory always really eloquently breaks down how with pre the French Revolution, pretty much all industry was like that, where it's like secret guilds holding secret knowledge,
Yeah, right.
and kind of keeping it from the masses. And I think that there is an argument that this could be that. But first, I wanted to throw that out. What do you guys think about like a master apprentice scenario? What do you think worked about it? Do you think we should still incorporate it? Do you think it's possible to still incorporate it? It's a lot of questions. So, Scott, what do you think? Master apprentice.
Is it possible?
Scenario.
That's definitely possible. It's been a while since I've mentored anyone, but I have I have done that. I used to do that through my Patreon and everything. But yeah, I think I definitely think. I mean, I don't think it's the only way, and it's definitely but I think that personal kind of one-on-one. I don't know. It's just I think it's kind of a mutually beneficial arrangement for both people involved. For both the student and the instructor or master, however you want to put it. But yeah, because I got a lot out of mentoring people, and at times where I've been mentored, of course I get a lot out of that. And I guess it doesn't have to be a one-on-one, but typically when I think mentorship, I kind of think one-on-one.
Yeah, it's either one-on-one, or I wouldn't usually think I'm mentoring an audience. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Yeah. So usually, even if it's a mentorship, like, arguably, like, Cory went through his masters and stuff too. And I would say that's kind of built on a bit of a mentorship model, like most master's programs, where you have a committee of like 3 people who are kind of your mentors throughout your experience in school. But they're not just mentoring you; they're mentoring a few select students, right? So yeah, I agree with you on that. Like, I wouldn't call, like what I do in my classes, I wouldn't call it fully mentorship, right? Cory,
well, there's probably aspects of what you're doing that you would consider mentorship.
There's elements of it, I think, if you're doing it right. Yeah.
So
what are your thoughts on that?
I think it is probably the single most effective way that you can learn a specific skill set, given that you have the right person that you're is a mentor. But I think it is almost impossible to do nowadays. I think this just economies of scale have kind of eliminated that as a possibility, because we're hearkening back to a time where people were able to slow life down enough to where it's like, I'm going to not make any money for 10 to 15 years while I kind of like learn this craft, because my mentor is being supported by the church or by the Lord of the
Medicis or something,
or whatever, you had patrons, which were giving you more than $2 a month. You know what I mean? Like, and so I don't know that there's I do think that kind of one-on-one, I think is an enviable situation. But I don't think it's really a likely possibility in today's society, given that we have to, you've got to start making money pretty quickly. And so like a lot of people are like, oh, why don't we have art like the old masters? And it's because, well, I spend 40 or 50 hours a week trying to pay for my house and buy food. And then I do art, so like, it's not like I get to like sit there and, do art because somebody is like funding me to do that. And so from that aspect, I think it's not a reasonable thing, but I think there is a quality loss in education the more it is scaled up.
Yep.
And so if I've got a class of 7, they're going to get a significantly better experience than a class of 35, who is going to get a significantly better experience than a class of 100, who's going to get a significantly better experience than a bunch of people that are watching it on YouTube or doing like an asynchronous kind of like Zoom situation or something like that. So the more disconnected you are from the expertise,
it like scales away from
Yeah, there's a
like,
direct inverse relationship to the quality of the effectiveness of the education. And I don't think my master's was online.
Yeah.
And I think it worked for me because I wasn't 19 and I made it work. Like I went out of my way to like milk every last drop of value out of that situation. Because I could have skated by and gotten by a lot easier. I made it harder on myself because I wanted to make it worth it.
I love that, Cory, that you mentioned that, because there's a couple people when it came to the credential where they were like, why don't you just pay like a couple $1,000s more and do one of the stupid online things? You know?
Do
I heard this from a lot of people.
Yeah.
Because there are some really, I mean, I don't want to call them out or anything, but there's some fake kind of colleges where you could very easily get your teaching credential. And
I'll call them out. University of Phoenix, Western Governors, like those types of things. Sure. Yeah.
So part of why I went to the local Cal State here is it's local and I can go in person. And even if it's digital classes, I can have contact with professors, because if I'm gonna pay for education, I want to get educated. Like I want to make it the best experience. So for that same reason, so I'm glad you mentioned that. You broke that down in the best way I can possibly imagine, Cory, because probably because I just agree with you wholeheartedly. I think I will say, when you for those of you who are watching who've been doing art for a long time, when you teach a group of artists, one of the walls you're going to hit a lot of the time is the frustration that you don't have the time to sit with them for a whole hour in an hour-long class and mentor them for a whole hour at the neglect of, the 30 whatever other students you have in the class, right? And that can be a little frustrating, because that one-on-one, the ability for an artist to sit by you and watch you ink a line, right? And go, no, like try like lifting your brush up a little bit. The ability for somebody to really mentor is I think irreplaceable, and I think that old model was great. But there's a couple downsides that I think are good. Well, for one thing, we can't go back to that model because just logistics, it's just not going to happen. Second thing, that model also ruled out the majority of human beings from making art.
Yes, it was very elitist.
Yeah. So there's that, where it's like we can wax poetic about the past, but I feel like we're doing the same thing all the girls that love Jane Austen novels do. Where they're like, man, if I was in that era, I'd just love being in Pride and Prejudice era. And it's like, no, you wouldn't. You'd be a serf. The poor family in a Jane Austen movie is like the 1 of the 1%. Like that's who she's writing about. And then, like the poorest characters in her stories are like, oh, this poor family only has one servant servicing their manor. How destitute they are, and it's like that wasn't most people's experience at that time,
And they are still spending most of their time at like tea parties and dinner parties and talking and wearing nice. Like none of them are like dirt farmers. None of them are like, well, I've walked behind the mule for the last 12 hours, but the sun's gone down now and we can't afford a candle, so good night.
And meanwhile, like the poor families at the time are literally sending their like 5-year-olds to work. You know what I mean? Like this is a different era in time, so that we can get nostalgic and kind of think back on it. But I do think, anyhow, I will say though, if you were one of the fortunate ones back then to have a one-on-one mentorship situation, that was kind of ideal. But I agree with Cory that you kind of have to scale it up. And part of that is just for equity, right? Like you want to actually start creating scenarios where more people have options and more freedom, right? And so, anyhow, but I agree with Cory in the sense of like, if I could have like a perfect world, I'd be able to have like one student a year. And that student would get so good. Like they'd get so good. Like I'd push them beyond where I've ever been able to achieve.
I would also point out that there are a lot of huge benefits that we have nowadays that we didn't have back then.
Yes.
And I don't know if this is where you're taking this, but I've been thinking a lot about, I read a book called Decoding Greatness, which is basically just a long book that talks about how to reverse engineer things, and why you do that and the stages of doing that. And so like you go through like doing a master study, which is a term that we use in art to talk about like, I'm going to try to copy this thing exactly, right? And in doing that, you're not putting something in your portfolio, but you are spending the hours and hours and hours that you would need to really understand why they're doing every brushstroke or every ink line or whatever, right? And then in reverse engineering it, you're sitting there and you're studying it and you're sitting with it and you're trying to analyze different aspects of it. And so I do this in class where I'm like, this week we're going to reverse engineer a bunch of work and we're only going to focus on saturation contrast. And next week we're only going to focus on color temperature contrast. And we spend 8 weeks just talking about all the different types of contrast. Now, years ago, if you wanted to listen to a song, you would play that song, or you had to go somewhere where somebody would play that song. And so it wasn't like you could just listen to music. And same thing, if you wanted to see a painting, if you wanted to see a sculpture, there's no prints, there's no internet, there's no collected works. There's no artist edition.
Yeah, at most, like a little bit further in art history, you had woodcut replicas.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Like printmaking replicas of the real thing. Like most people didn't see the Statue of David as a photo. The general public saw, drawings of that were, printed within books. Like they didn't have, photography is even relatively new. So.
Right. And so there are some huge aspects to like, if you want to learn from Scotty Young, if you want to learn from, any of these artists, if you want to learn from, I'm blanking on everybody that I've studied recently, Sean Gordon Murphy or whatever, like, you can literally just look at their work because you have a copy of it in your house, or you can look it up on the internet. Or you can purchase a digital copy of it and kind of like blow it up on your iPad or whatever. Yeah. And you can do all kinds of things that you couldn't do before, and so there's a trade-off. Like, you don't really have access to the like one-on-one that, the mentoring thing, but you also do have access to every piece of visual thing that has ever been created that has survived thus far is available for you to look at and study and break down and reverse engineer and, trace over and learn from and analyze.
Yeah. I've talked about this with students, where, when I wanted to learn how to ink, I grew up copying comics, like a lot of us, right? Where I'd be like, I love this Spider-Man cover, I'm going to redraw it exactly, and I'd get to areas that had what I now know as feathering, right? And I loved the look of it, but I didn't understand what tool was making it, right?
Right.
And this is pre-internet. And so by the time I get to college, I had learned a style where I was drawing the outline of feathered edges with like micron, like thinking that's what made that look, and I remember it was only like after seeing a couple videos where an artist was inking with a brush and they just kind of lifted up the brush and suddenly they had this feathered edge, and I was like, oh, like that's what I've been trying to do, right? One of the advantages of where we live, where the time we live in now is, if you have the wherewithal and a desire to learn a technique, most techniques are kind of unlocked for you, right? Like you can pretty much watch any technique. So that is a really cool benefit of the modern era, as well as what Cory was saying is the wealth of images. I mean, just think of, Scott, when you started, I know for me too, but when you started in commercial art, right? What did you used to have for photo references?
Well, like a Mork file.
right?
Yeah.
Can you explain to our audience what that is, just in case?
It's
we got some young kids.
basically clippings that you would get from whatever magazines, newspaper, or anything. Even and when the internet first came around, I remember printing things off of the internet because they would take forever to load half the time. So once you get it to load, you print it up and then you put it in a folder or whatever, and then you just keep it collect. And if you're depending on how serious you are about it, you can label them and put them in files, different things. So I think I went through most of mine and got rid of, unless it was just something that I couldn't find online. But yeah, it had file cabinets of just reference photos like human anatomy, cars, whatever. Or I'd have the other thing I used was like stock photo books, or so which are basically before you can go on like a stock photo website, like a Shutterstock or something like that. They would have books that you would order those images from. So I'd have these big giant catalog sized books, so I could go through those. Another one that's really good that I would still kind of I think now you can find it online, but it's still good. It's still really an excellent resource, and those are visual dictionaries.
Yeah, those are awesome.
Yeah, so awesome. There's the Macmillan, and then I think what's the other is it DK or I think there's a couple of them. The DK one is more like kind of photographs of things, and if it's something that doesn't exist, they'll build a model of it. And then it kind of breaks it down, and it also tells you what each little part is, what everything's called. So it's also good for writing, because what is this part called or whatever. The other thing I like about it is it'll take the most common version of a thing, whether it's a plane, whether it's anything. So because sometimes when you're searching online, like if I wanted to search, like I don't know, if I wanted to search like a vacuum cleaner, maybe if I'm doing a cartoon, maybe I kind of want like an old style, like a common look at like what before we've got these Dyson vacuums that are like space age looking, but just to make it,
they have like tubes everywhere.
Yeah. Sometimes you just want something a little more simplistic, and sometimes you can find those in like a visual dictionary. And so
that's
books
great.
Like that. I've got tons of books like that. I've got books on different subject. Yeah, exactly. So
I just thought of the most morbid thing. If Cory held up a book called Motorcycles, and then the next is like anatomy, like it's just all related to the accident. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's horrible.
Yeah,
that's beautiful.
I've got
though.
Stuff like that too. Yeah, but yeah. So, and I mean, those things aren't obsolete. I think the morgue, for the most part, I don't know. I mean, you can still keep. I haven't heard it called the morgue, but you can still keep files on your computer of different things. But it's just
you can even still have a physical collection of photos and stuff that you want to reference for stuff, but it's just I think the utility of it has diminished over time.
And I would almost, because I mean it's so easy to search stuff now that I've kind of stopped doing that. But when you think about it, everyone's searching for the same stuff, and you're gonna unless you keep going deeper and deeper, you're going to get the same stuff. So it kind of makes sense to keep a morgue or keep some kind of reference books around, because your images aren't going to look the same as everyone else's. So.
Keith Foster said, for a moment I thought Cory was going to hold up a 400-page book on vacuum cleaners, which would have been incredible. It's like the Dyson like order catalog, or is it Dyson? I don't know, Hoover or whatever. Okay, I want
to. Sometimes my goal on the show is just to bring up whatever book people are talking about at the time.
Yeah. Well, I think it's helpful though to illustrate that this isn't like an individual thing. Like these are interests that artists have, right? Like artists often are collecting weird books and stuff like that, because it's like when you're at a bookstore, you're like, holy crap, this would be super useful. This exploded cutaway book of all the ships from World War II might be useful if I ever do something with World War II, Coyote said, I will cut things out of a magazine, post and paste them in a binder. Yeah, that used to be the only way. Was a lot of that.
I did that when I was teaching myself photography. Is I would do that by way of like reverse engineering out the lighting and stuff. Because before Photoshop, you could tell what was going on in the studio in the reflections of the model's eyes.
Yeah.
And so you could kind of go in there, oh, they're using an octagon softbox,
They're using a ring
like
light.
a strip light.
And now
They're
you
using a
can
ring
see
light.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now there's some guy like painting those in, like in Photoshop digitally. But anyway.
I love that.
I used to do that. Yeah.
I love it. But Jim is surprised that you're back in town, and he said, "Am I in a time machine, Cory?"
Yeah, you are. This episode happened 4 months ago.
That's true. We recorded this in the past and then traveled to the future to deliver it, which makes no sense, but think about it and it will. Okay, real quick. So we talked about kind of our different experiences in education, a little bit about education and the mentor model. Here's a question. Before we get into it, I'm going to try to do a speed round of finding out what your guys' teaching philosophies are. Because we all teach art in one way or another. Some of us, I think as you become a vet in illustration, inevitably we're going to be mentoring people who are new to the field. I mean, that's just, you almost inherit that, right?
Full disclosure, I'm not aware of the different teaching philosophies. So.
Oh, no. I'm going to go through them and define them. So I'm not,
Okay.
yeah. I'm not going to be like, what do you think about Zabba Zuba Zabba? And you're like, I don't know what that is. And it's like, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm going to go through them. I have them pulled up myself with like a little cheat sheet. So, but there's different approaches, and I'm curious where we align. I think they'll be different, and it'll be interesting. But before we kind of get there, what do you guys think about? How do you think, if you're an artist, what do you think is the most important thing for an artist to do to get educated in art, and then why should they? And then we'll get into philosophy, I guess.
Can you define what you mean by art in this instance?
So, if I want to become a good artist, why would I want to get educated about art? And then, second, is it worth it to do that formally?
Okay. So I'd say the most important thing in art or any aspect of creativity is that you are doing it when people do not require you to do it. And so it doesn't matter what degrees you have or what school you've gone to, or even if you had some sort of cool mentorship or something, if you're not making stuff because you want to make it, you're not going to make it. Right. It's just not going to happen. And so I think that is probably the number one indicator. I've been teaching now for 11 years. I could have anywhere from, 300 plus students a year, that in various things. And so, I'm talking, over 3,000 people that I've watched. It is almost a guarantee that somebody who is spending some of their free time making stuff that they're not required to do for work or for school will end up getting very, very good and be successful in what they choose to be successful in. And it's almost a guarantee that those people that don't do that will likely end up in a different career.
Yeah, it's like a flash in a pan kind of moment for them.
Yeah.
I've observed the same thing. I think that I think the game changer when it comes to seeking an education is wanting it and wanting to get good at the thing. And by want, I mean like real want. Like when you really want something, you're going to work for it, right?
Yeah, want that drives action.
Yeah, like real want. Like you're hungry. That's why people call it hunger, right? It's like you don't.
Yeah.
Like if you're legitimately hungry, you're going to get to a point where you're starving and you will do something to get food, right?
Yeah, right.
It's the same thing. You need that kind of urgency. And I agree. If I think back to my own career or any of our careers from conversations we've had with guests and stuff, I'd say that's probably the one commonality you're going to see with most professional artists is they were super hungry when they were younger, maybe still, Scott, what about you for why should an artist seek education?
And
if they do, does it have should it be formal?
I have more of an opinion on the latter half of that question. I mean,
Okay.
I think I disagree with kind of what Cory said. You know, if as far as you got to have a passion for it, or it's just there's better things. These are easier ways to make money if you don't have a passion for it. If you're just going for, I don't know too many artists that go into it just for the money. Although when you think about it, if you are an artist, if you're a creator, you don't have to outsource that part to other people. If you're a designer, so I learned graphic design. I learned illustration, so I don't have to hire a graphic designer. I don't have to hire an illustrator.
Exactly,
I can build my own thing to sell, and that can be a big expense for somebody who just wants to make money. So really, if you're if you're able to create a product, then I mean, and now, I mean, of course, now people can do that with AI, but I remember when I was going into like KDP, like publishing online, I mean, you know, some of it was frustrating because here I'm an artist trying to make these great books and other people just churning out garbage, and sometimes that garbage sold. But those people, you know, I would watch a bunch of stuff on how to do it, and everyone's, oh, here's how to find artists, or here's how to get a cheap artist, or whatever. And you know, I passed that. So if you're good at business and you're an artist, I think you can be super successful because you can do pretty much the whole thing yourself. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't straddle those two lines. So that's what I'll say about the first part. The second part.
What were you disagreeing with? Because
I'm a little lost on that too.
What disagreeing about? What did I say? I disagreed with.
Oh, you said you disagreed with what I was saying.
No, I said I agreed with what you said.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Oh, okay. I heard disagree too, so I was like, huh.
Maybe I said the wrong thing, you know.
No, I agree.
I was just
Scott.
like, oh, cool.
Yeah, then I agree with Scott too, because you got to have passion. Yeah.
No,
I've had this argument because I've been doing these interviews about creativity and creative production specifically, and I think I just want to point out, is passion the word that you mean? Because
I know you don't like the word passion. I just say that for lack of a better term. But if you've got a better term,
So Keith that I just interviewed and Gary that I interviewed a couple of weeks ago both used the term.
By the way, this series of interviews that you're doing is incredible, Cory. You guys stay tuned. It's going to be cool. Anyhow,
it's gonna be really fun. They both use the term love, which I like a lot more because passion is a fleeting emotion, but love, if you love someone and it's hard, you don't immediately abandon that person. If it's going to take work, you're going to do the work. If it's reciprocal, you love and you are loved, you're getting something out of that as well.
Yeah.
Passion is this intense, fleeting thing that just, it's there and it is gone. But love is like, I'm in there for the good times and the bad, through thick and thin, and that type of thing. And so that's the first time I've heard something that I'm like, that's, I think, what people mean when they say passion.
Yeah. And to me, it's just semantics. But I mean, you're right. I mean, it's, you know, I didn't, you know.
No, you guys,
the only reason I bring it up is not to and the only reason I bring it up is not to split hairs, but I feel like sometimes people, like I've felt this way for a long time, I don't have really strong emotions, and so I always kind of feel like, I kind of like that thing, but I don't think I like it enough to like claim that I like it publicly, you know, or what. Like I'm always like, I hear people talk about passion, and I'm like, do I have a passion? Like, I'm not like in the thralls of ecstasy as I'm doing this. I do love it, but I don't know if I did spend decades not doing things that I loved because I felt like I should feel stronger about it because of the way people talked about it. That's my only thing, is in case anybody is hearing that and saying oh, well, I don't know if I have passion. It's like, well, very few people do on a sustainable level.
Yeah, and I think that's actually good too, because there's the other end of passion too. Although I use the term passion, be passionate about what you do. But I think that's a good distinction, Cory, because I also come across a lot of young artists who aren't in love with it. And so when it gets hard, or just kind of like, you know, like, I'm not feeling it. Like, I don't feel it. That's the inspiration thing, right? The muse hasn't hit me, so I'm not going to. And it's like, that can be a dangerous road if you're only creating art when you're in the throes of the muse, whatever the muse is. It can be as elusive as passion. But in agreement with Scott too, there is a passion in it, just like any love scenario where, you know, when you're truly in love with something, there will be moments of passion and moments of, you know, sheer terror and boredom. Like it's, okay.
Okay, so sorry, Scott. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, Scott. So go ahead.
No
Keep
worries. Going. So the second part, and I don't think you'll disagree with me, but you guys are both professional teachers, so
well, so are you.
Well, yeah, but I mean, in a more because the question is, do you a traditional
formal,
formal education. So, like I said, I just went to community college. I took basically every single art class I could. I started off taking fine art classes, not knowing at the time the difference between fine and commercial art, when in fact I did what I was interested in more was commercial art. But I still think that definitely helped me. And then I got into what they called commercial art at the time. I don't know, maybe it's called something else now. So first things first, if you want to do this professionally, no one's ever asked me and I've worked for like studios and things like that. No one's ever asked to see, you know, my diploma or anything like that.
Yep.
I got hired at a game studio. I got hired along the same day with another artist who had fancy art education. Both got hired, same pay rate and everything, same day, everything. So it doesn't, I mean, aside from if you want to teach like higher learning or whatever, like you guys, you don't need any kind of diploma. So
I agree with
I would say the main thing is do not go into debt over if you are you know, independently wealthy, or you come from a wealthy family, and your parents, that's not a problem, or whoever is not a problem to pay for your art school. Yeah, I mean, you're most likely gonna get a great education. There are alternatives, and especially and also it kind of depends on a few different factors. One, how disciplined are you? If you're disciplined enough to buckle down and learn online, you can save a ton of money. If you can get, you know, also in addition to being independently wealthy, if you can get scholarships or anything like that. If you, like right now, my son, he's not going to art school, but he's paying his way through college as he works. So if that's something you want to do, but he's gonna graduate without me having to even help him, he'll graduate debt free. But the way we are helping him, his mother and I he's living at home and he's not having to pay these expenses. So it's essentially kind of the same thing. But so don't go into debt over it. Now, if you don't have a lot of money and you do need that discipline, you need to be in that setting with other students and have kind of that, not one-on-one, but that teacher, you know, the in-person type relationship to kind of keep you focused or on track. Then a setting like that is going to be ideal. Of course, like it's going back to, you got to find a way to do it without breaking the bank. And I'm sure there are all kind of other alternatives or whatever, you know.
I think that's great.
There are, when I said before that no one looks at your diploma, there are certain schools like Cal Arts or something. I wouldn't advise it right now because the animation industry is kind of in the toilet, but if you wanted to work for Disney, almost everyone gets hired. So, I mean, there's
reasons beyond just the degree, though, that I'll kind of get into with Cal Arts. Like the reason people look at Cal Arts and go, "Ooh, you could work in animation."
Right. There's some prestige around it and everything too. So there is that. But you know, the worst thing I mean, if you go into debt and you're working in the field, that's all right. But I've heard so many stories of people that have art school debt that aren't working as artists, and that saddens me. It sickens me, to be quite honest. So.
No, I agree with that. So, okay, I want to hop in there, and then I want Cory to hop in. So, my opinion is, I think formal education. I think all routes are appropriate. I think that self-education is great. Like, I think that if you have the gumption to read a bunch of books and seek out information on your own and build peer networks on your own so that you can get influence and stuff like that from other artists. There's no reason you have to have a formal education, because Scott's right. Like most, at least commercial art jobs or art galleries, they don't care about your degree. They just want to see a solid portfolio, and they want to know that you can hit deadlines and that you're not a jerk. Right? Those are like the three key things. Can you hit deadlines? Do you have a solid portfolio? And are you a pleasure to work with? Right? Those three things, you master those, you don't need a college degree to get into the art world. However, I think that this will get it. There's a structure to what I'm doing here. I'm getting a little better with this, even though I'm rambling. I want us to start thinking about this because this might tie into our teaching philosophies. I think there's more to a formal education, especially a general education, even in a college setting, that is worth going into debt for. That has nothing to do with money. And that's going to be something I'll get into a little more when we get into teaching philosophies. But I think there is certain things that aren't monetary that you get from a broad the general education you have to do before specialized education in your field. And then I think, like Cory was saying, like, with the mentorship and the one-on-one, I think the more divorced you get from one-on-one interactions with an instructor, you can get something from it, but I think it's a diminishing return the further it gets from the instructor. Like if it's a 7-person class, you're going to have amazing results from those students. If there's 40 people in the class, less amazing results. If it's an online class with 40 people, probably less amazing results. I can't reiterate enough like how if in my classes when I did live demos of art for my art students, and this is high school, so it's public education. They don't pay for it. Well, everybody's paying for it with their property taxes, right? But I've thought about this, and I don't want to film YouTube videos and just play YouTube videos for my kids. Because when I do, and I call them kids, but students, when I do a live demo, there's a real benefit to them being able to go, hey, wait a minute, what did you do there? And I can get into it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like I can actually reverse engineer stuff in real time for them. Answer their questions. And there is something about seeing something live that I think is very inspiring. I've experienced that myself. The first time I took like a college art class when I was in high school, it was over the summer. I was with a professor we've had on here, Frank Dixon. We had him as a guest. And I saw him work in class, and that literally changed my career goals. It was just so inspiring to see in person. If I saw that on YouTube, not quite as much. It's just not quite as real. So anyhow, there's more to it than that, but the general gist is I think there's value to it. The other value of going to a formalized education, the reason Scott was mentioning CalArts and the reason that has a reputation is CalArts isn't just about the teachers. It's a tight-knit unit of bonds you make with the people you go to school with. And those will be your war buddies for life. I don't know if that makes sense. So even now in my 40s, friends of mine like Chris, who's in the chats, right, from my 20s, they're like my war buddies. And like if I'm like out of work, like they're the people who help me get work. My wife is one of my war buddies, that I met in school. So I think those relationships are good, but I agree with Scott in the sense of most of it is not irreplaceable by self-directed work. And there's one common thread, which tying into what Cory was saying earlier in the first question, the common thread is either way, like if you go to college and you just get a piece of paper, you might as well just burn it. You know what I mean? If you're going there for a diploma and a piece of paper that says, congrats, you're special, just print one out for yourself, right? But if you're going there for education and you have the drive to actually learn, you will do well. And honestly, if you don't go to college and you have the drive to actually learn, I think you will do well. I will say statistically, people may not like hearing it, but people with college educations do have higher employment rates. So that's, however, I agree with Scott. In art, it's a little different because, again, I have never, equally to Scott, unless I was doing an educational job or trying for like some executive position, nobody cares what your degree is or where it's from. Oh, other thing, if your art director is from the alma mater that you have, they will care. Because, like, I will tell you, I loved my school. And so anytime I'd see Cal State Long Beach applicants, I'd be like, oh, I'm interviewing this person. You know what I mean? Because I knew the school and the program. I'm like, it's a solid program. They probably know how to draw, right?
That's different than it's the people that you know. Because like I said, yeah, I did when I was going to school.
Yeah,
my instructor was very connected and saw that I was pretty good at marker rendering. So as soon as somebody came to the school and asked, "Hey, do you have anyone that's good at marker rendering? And we need somebody to design storefronts and stuff for us," I was the first person they talked to because I knew somebody. I mean, I proved myself, but I also knew somebody. So it's not. I mean, the whole thing about it's who you know is not a joke. That's very real. So.
Yeah, but that's not just college specific, because you could botch your opportunity with that, even going to formal education in college, right? And just kind of plow through and not make relationships with the people, your classmates, and then you've lost that, which is like one of the biggest advantages of college. What Cory calls like real networking, not what do you call it, Cory? Because you hate the word networking, but it's like what we do here with Artcasters.
I can't remember, but yeah, I think
you had a better term for it, but I can't remember either.
It must have been a spur of the moment term because I don't remember it. But yeah, I think I would agree with Scott and Josh for different reasons, and so I think one of the biggest killers of the artist, the inner artist in all of us, is to be saddled with so much debt that you have to do certain things that you wouldn't normally do. Like I have to make this amount of money, or I have to do this type of thing. And that is, it's a huge killer. And so when my students come to me and say, I'm thinking about getting a master's degree, or I'm thinking about going to art school, or I'm thinking about doing this or whatever, I'm a huge proponent of higher education. I think the more that you can learn creative thinking skills, critical thinking skills, the more that you can have your assumptions challenged and learn to question authority and learn the different types of processes that will help you kind of do those types of things, which are not exclusive to a college campus, but tend to be kind of the core of a good education. And I think you can pay a lot of money and spend a lot of time and not get a good education. Unfortunately, I think that's also true.
Yeah.
But I think those are huge, and not just so that you can draw well, but also because those types of critical thinking faculties are going to help you be a good citizen. They're going to help you be a good parent. They're going to help you be a good friend. They're going to help you, be a critical, thinker about, the media consumption that you're doing, so that you have some media literacy, so that you're not just being programmed by the oligarchs, and those types of things. All of those things I think are really important. I think have a tendency to be, you have a better chance of getting them through higher education. On the other hand, when somebody comes to me and says, I'm thinking about getting an MBA, I'm thinking about getting a master's degree, I'm thinking about getting an MFA, I'm thinking about I say, hit the brakes super hard. Go draw 1,000 heads. Go out and get years of experience out there, because my master's, I paid it off 8 months after I graduated. And the reason that I did was because I sold my house, I moved into an apartment, I sold my second car so that we became a one-car family, and we lived like paupers, paying it off as we went while I was working full-time, like Josh is doing now, so that it wouldn't ruin me afterwards. And so I think that if you're willing to make the sacrifices, like Scott's son is doing, if you're willing to make the sacrifices to not have a dentist level debt after you come out of it, you're going to be significantly better off from a financial position. You'll also be better off from a mental position. And then the other thing is, and this is a fairly unpopular opinion in higher education, so I am kind of a little bit of a black sheep. I think postgraduate work is wasted on people in their 20s. Not wasted, but is not as effective. If you can do it in your 30s or your 40s, I think it's going to be way better.
I agree. I think you need to be a little seasoned because it's like, especially in MFA, and I think an MA is very similar, but I will say it'll kind of break you down and rebuild you. And it's not them breaking you down. It's like, that's part of the process of working on your master's, is like really finding your identity, because the undergrad is being a sponge. You're just absorbing information, and maybe you're expressing yourself and stuff like that, but you're really absorbing information, building relationships, learning new skills, learning new concepts, having those concepts challenged. You know, graduate schools where it's like, okay, you've got all that, now what's yours?
I think Gary's bringing this up in the chat. I was in class with people that I felt like it was immoral to have them in class. Like I was like, this person sucks so bad at this that they should not have been admitted, and I find it to be unethical that the school was taking their money for tuition. I agree. And it was like that is a level of grift that it rages me to this day. It's like, I'm not being a gatekeeper, and I'm not saying, oh, whatever, you know, people don't deserve it. But I'm like, it is beneficial to some people to say, hey, you're not there yet. Yeah. Why don't you do the following 16 things, come back in 3 years, and you'll actually get something out of this? Because I left with a manageable amount of debt that I was able to pay off in under a year. Other people left because I got scholarships. I worked hard to do all the stuff that I needed to do to cut that education down as much as I possibly could. And I went to an expensive school. But it wasn't as expensive as it could have been had I not done all this stuff. If they didn't do the things that I did, which I'm assuming they didn't, then they could be $60,000 to $100,000 in the hole, and they still don't know how to draw.
I agree with Cory on that. I would say this ties into Gary's comment too, where he said, I had student loans for a normal university and it was totally worth it. I'm pro higher ed. In my experience, though, art school tuition is staggering and not worth it. Just to be clear to Ed about money, I will agree with that to an extent. I will say this: if you ever go to a private college, vet the college, because honestly, public institutions have specific standards they have to meet. Or at least they used to before the Department of Education got closed. So who knows? It's less of a sure thing with all private art colleges. Just because a college says art college, don't just go, oh, I should pay $80,000 a year for that. That again, like I will say I'm very similar to Gary, where I come from working class, and I'm very proud of going to Cal State, and then when I graduated from that Cal State, ending up in the same design annuals as all the art center kids. However, if I wanted to work for Disney, why would I not be going to art school at the one school 90% of Disney employees went to, and building those relationships there? Because that's the relationship building thing. However, you could always do what my classmate Jeremy Spears did when we were in school, which is when we were out of our BFA program at the Cal State, drive over to the art school and just be there late at night watching lectures for free and making those relationship connections with those students. So just saying. Okay. Wow, we're getting so much interesting stuff here. Dylan said, I'm most likely not going to art college. I did take out loans though, and I will say I'm not a fan of taking out loans, but again, we'll get into educational philosophy in a second. But I think even being straddled with that sometimes is worth it, because there are some things that are worth more than money. But being straddled with $80,000 a year for a huckster art institution, not all of them are hucksters, but there are some out there. Be careful.
And it is different. We're talking like there is a difference between now, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago. So if you hear a boomer or a Gen Xer talk about, well, when I was your age, I did what, it's significantly different now, because you are in a stage for the last 10 years where you could like, let's say you take out $50,000 to go to school and you pay the minimums on that. 10 years from now, you could actually owe $70,000. Like, your loan will increase because the interest is out of whack right now. And so it's different. It's just, I think if you can figure out a way to reduce that significantly, I highly recommend it. And I also agree that the experience that you're going to get is more important than money, and that it is not exclusive to art school. It's not exclusive to a master's degree, but I look at my master's and I'm like, I could have done all of that. It probably would have taken me 3 times as long.
Yeah. And also, here's another thing is I wouldn't have gotten challenged doing all of that. Like, the advantage of an institution is a teacher is going to give you a real critique, right? Friends and yourself aren't always. And so, like, if you are seeking a self-evaluating thing, surround yourself with people who will tear your crap apart with love. Okay? Not the people who are just pessimists, right? But I mean people who will, like, if you misspell a word, they're going to speak up rather than let you print it because they care about your name, right? Doesn't that make sense? Okay, let's get into educational philosophy. I know Scott's like, but Scott is a smart dude, so trust me, this will make sense when I go through it. Because here's the thing, I am an advocate of philosophy. I hate snootiness. So the two can coexist. You can both agree with a lot of philosophy, think it's valuable, but also think a lot of people abuse it and use big words to, like, kind of, well, they're trying to go back to that old Medici system, like, where it's like, well, I know the words, I know the code word to get in my secret club. It's like, I don't want that kind of thing. But I think it's valuable. So let's get into I'm going to break down 5 of the main educational philosophies, and then get a flavor of where we align. So I'm going to blast through them, and then I want quick feedback, okay, on what you think. Okay? Sound good?
Good luck.
I know. You guys are like, Josh blasting through anything is not going to happen.
Were you blasting through anything and us giving you quick feedback? None of the 3 of us are succinct.
Well, let's give it a shot. We got a good, like,
go ahead.
30 to go. Okay.
Let's do it.
Okay, I'm going to list them first. There's perennialism, progressivism. By the way, when I say these things, understand all of these. This is why Cory was really nitpicky about a specific use of words earlier. In academia, like, some words have loaded meaning, and they're divorced from the context of broader things. So I want to say, like, when I'm saying progressivism in education, that doesn't mean progressivism in a political way. Now, there's crossovers, but my point is all of these, like, perennialism in education is different than perennialism outside of education. But we'll get into that. Let's list the 5. Perennialism, progressivism, behaviorism, existentialism, and social reconstructionism. Like, those are kind of the 5 big dogs of modern teaching. Now, keep in mind, there's a lot of substructures, and like all philosophy, right? Even outside of academia, right? Let's just say you read a philosophy book. You might read Socrates and be like, "Hey, he had some good points," and then read Nietzsche and be like, "Oh, he had some good points, but I don't agree with him wholesale." Right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Or I could listen to an artist I really admire, like Jack Kirby. I could listen to him talk about art, and I could be like, man, I agree with Jack Kirby on like 60% of what he says, but there's like 40% I'm like, meh, but I do like what Dave McKeon says about 80%. Does that make sense? My point is, you can agree with some parts. You don't have to wholesale agree with the full philosophy. Okay, so that's what I want feedback on. What do you agree with of these things, and what don't you? So let's start with one. Perennialism. It's also sometimes kind of lumped with what's called essentialism, and that is perennialism would be the idea of like eternal truths, permanence, order, certainty, rationality, and logic are the ideal, right? That's a perennialist. So education, generally perennialists have the idea of education should be the same for everyone. So they believe in equality, but we'll get into that. It's kind of a loaded term too. They think that the task is to impart the knowledge of eternal truth, right? So this is that idea, the Socratic idea of like the third eye that can see the truths that are hovering around us, right? Your goal as a teacher is to help kids grasp those outer truths that are there. They just need to be able to see them. And then also, students should be taught basic subjects. Like generally, perennialists are like, hey, there's these foundational things you have to know, like period. Like, students should study great works. Generally, perennialists believe in the idea of masters, essential, like classic works, criterion collections. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And then finally, they need to return to the past, to universal truths and absolutes of reason and faith. So those tend to be perennialist teaching ideas. Keep in mind, there are a lot of teachers in academia that are still perennialists, full perennialists. So this is and this was the way of teaching in like the 1800s, basically, up to like the early 19.
A lot of them that tends to be in the administration of universities.
So, well, depending on the university, yeah. But that's true. So, what do you guys think about perennialism? The idea, let me try to boil it down to something simpler. That there's eternal truths that are important to hammer into students. Like students need specific eternal truths, and that's one of the key things about education. And that basically they have to study the great works. And
this might get into another annoying thing, but it depends.
We're bullet pointing, by the way. We're trying to condense.
So it depends for me on what we're saying education is for. So if we are talking about higher education as it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, versus higher education now, I think there's a drastic difference. So if we're talking about education by way of occupation, or vocation,
we'll get into that philosophy.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, I don't think that way of thinking is as useful as an entrance into the industry. Yeah. But I think there's some good parts about it. Like generally, I think it's better to have well-read people that have, kind of like read masterworks and types of things. So I'd say I'm a percentage of that, but
tiny bit percentage. Yeah. Okay, what about you, Scott? Do you think there are great works that people have to know as artists, and that eternal truths, permanence, order, certainty, rationality, logic, these are like the fundamental thing you need to learn? What do you think?
Okay, so based on my understanding, I don't think I agree with this philosophy if this is what it is. Basically, I'm going to sum up kind of what my experience and kind of how I feel, and we can figure out what category that falls under. But I struggled in school, and I was pretty much I felt stupid throughout, my entire, early education. And it wasn't until I graduated and I started to figure out how to learn things teach myself the way I needed to be taught, that I realized that I wasn't stupid. So, because it seemed like there was a cookie cutter formula and I did not fit into that. And so pretty much I think the school system pretty much failed me,
Yep. I'd agree.
And that did a lot of damage to, I did a lot of insecurities and a lot of imposter syndrome based on those early years, even though, like I said, after graduating and learning on my own in my own way, I realized it wasn't because of that. And so
that is so beautifully put.
I'm against whatever that system is.
You know what's funny? I think it's almost ideal that you brought that up during perennialism, because you just, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but you just kind of unwittingly deconstructed some of the issues with perennialism, right? So that's my take on perennialism, is kind of both, both Cory and Scott. I think it is true that there are great works that it's good for an artist to be informed of. Like, you should probably study Michelangelo. You should probably study Rembrandt, right? You should probably look at Greek and Roman sculpture and learn a little bit about architecture and the history of art. I think it's important to learn these great things that humans have made. And I do think there are master works. However, I don't think teaching equally, and this ties into Gary's question. This is a great question that Gary said, where he said, the question, is it difficult to avoid teaching in a certain way solely because it's the way you would have wanted and worked for you? Yes, all teachers tend to struggle with that. But one of the things I don't like about perennialism is the idea of a cookie cutter education, where we're drilling almost like rote learning into people. And I know Cory's not a fan of rote learning either. Rote learning is just where it's like, hey guys, you do these 10 things, boom, done. That's it. It's the 10 things and you're done. Good. And having that be the same cookie cutter approach for everyone, that leaves people, like a lot of my friends and a lot of people who are very neurodivergent in the art field, kind of out in the dark, right? Because that assumes that everyone learns by the same methods and stuff. So, but agreeing with Cory too, I do think there is eternal truth, and I do think there are things like rationality and the ability to learn rational and logical thinking that are very important, but I would say probably not necessarily the primary. So,
and also,
I think we're all on the same board here.
Yeah. Also, I would say that maybe the eternal truths are not the purview of higher education as much as they are of religion. And so, like, I had a similar experience to Scott, though for completely different reasons, where I just always felt like I didn't fit into whatever. Like it's like I could see the strings of the marionette in school.
Yeah.
I was like, what? We are just doing the dumbest crap that doesn't matter. Like I am memorizing this stuff and then vomiting it out and immediately forgetting it. And it's like,
and you're asking why? Yeah.
Yeah. What is this 12 years that you're putting children through? And I've come to believe fairly strongly that kindergarten through 12th grade is this weird remnant of an archaic age where we didn't have robots, but we needed robots to work in factories. And so we tried to turn people into robots, and people like Scott bucked against that because it's an unnatural thing to do. And I think neurodivergence can be a bit of a superpower.
Yeah.
There's also, there's negative aspects to every different way of thinking. But like, if you have some neurodivergence that bucks against this system that is built to take neurotypical people and turn them into automatons that work in a factory 12 hours a day and don't want to kill themselves.
Yeah.
Then you're going to feel out of place. But that type of education, I don't think calling that education is accurate, because I think it's programming.
Yep.
I think what you're really trying to do is a conditioning system.
Yeah, you're basically like hammering down any nails that are sticking out, and that to me is a bad way to teach.
So
the classic perennial model is just like it's like the old movie where you have the guy going off, Bueller, like he's just kind of rambling about this long lecture, and you're expected as the astute student to stay quiet and sit back and absorb, and then maybe there's like drills to it. But one of the positives of perennialism that I personally agree with would be like the Socratic method, where you're not necessarily answering something for a student, you're asking them questions to guide them to a solution. And I do think the Socratic method holds pretty well. But I agree, and I think it's lame that Scott had that experience, and that's why I have main issues with perennialism. So, okay, let's get into number 2, which is a big part of modern education. So this is the second big philosophy. I think most of us have a bit of this. Progressivism. So do we have time? Should I just cut it out a couple? Because I don't know if I can get through all these. Scott, are you good? I know you have a hard out.
For another 20 minutes.
Okay, so I'll blast through them a little faster. So progressivism is classroom norms, curriculum, and ideologies of progressivism are... hold on. Okay, let's get into it. So the idea is children learn best by doing, right? Students learn best by doing. So progressivism was built on the idea that, like, hey, you have this old guy in a lecture hall rambling, and you have students doing drills and flashcards, rote learning, and then you put these people in a real environment, and none of them can do anything unique because they're just programmed, like Cory was saying, right? So progressivism's like learning should be related to the interest of the child. Like, so tying into what Scott was saying, or I keep saying child, but student, right? Progressivism believes that you can't just do a one-size-fits-all for teaching, right? That you need to like come along a student like Scott and be like, oh, you don't learn like these other kids learn. Let's work with you the way you learn, right? Let's work with them the way they learn. Like, try to kind of cater it to more broad people. It should be through problem solving over mastering. So perennialism's like, you must become a master of oil painting and paint like the masters. And, progressivism tends to be like, you should really be able to problem solve with what you're learning, right? And then teachers' role is to advise and be a guide rather than a king over the peasants, master and apprentice. And then schools should encourage cooperation more than competition. Like, meaning, in the perennial system, it's like the best cuts it, right? It's cutthroat. It's strongest survive kind of thing.
So is this like a Montessori style education?
Montessori would definitely be progressive, but progressivism it runs throughout like pretty much most modern education and institutions. It's just the idea that you can't just kind of program kids with a long lecture, that you need to actually have action and activity for people to really learn, right? That's the theory. And then the idea, but Montessori is very much progressivism, because it's like, only democracy encourages the interplay of ideas and personality, and that's what you need for like growth. So it's a more democratic approach to kind of teaching. So what do you think are the pluses and minuses of progressivism? Do you agree with progressivism in teaching? And so on.
I think
roughly. Obviously, we're just doing a spitball,
Yeah. So I'm not exactly sure, but my problem with some applications of this is, I think if done incorrectly, you can leave students a little bit leaderless.
True.
And to kind of wander in the dark and whatever. And I think everybody needs a little bit of direction and even some hand holding sometimes, and some guidance, and sometimes, it's kind of like gentle parenting. I don't even know what that is anymore, but like, sometimes you just tell your kid, nah, you're not going to have 47 cookies for dinner. You know, like there needs to be some boundaries and rules and so those types of things.
There's like a point in time where it's really unhealthy to have your children sleeping in the same bed. You know, like there's sorry, it's just true. It's like psychologically, it's just like there are some points where you have to really go, no, like, no, that's not going to happen. You know?
Yeah. And so I think I generally like the idea, though I would say the same thing that Scott was getting to earlier is like, this might work for certain personality types, but there are definitely types of students that I am aware of where they need help with a direction and a focus, and to leave them to their own devices as some sort of guide towards whatever they happen to be interested in. Whatever they happen to be interested in can change 47 different times in an hour, and that can be a disparate way of looking at things. So there's probably some good stuff about it. Yeah.
Scott, what are your thoughts on progressivism? Kind of catering more to the interests of the students.
I kind of agree with what Cory said, but I think I can just kind of foresee the future, and I think it really depends on the kind of student you are as to which one of these methods is going to work best for you. At least that's what it seems like playing out right now.
Yeah, so I agree with you guys both. I think Cory very accurately, the beauty of having Cory on is he's so eloquent, and Scott as well. So it's like you guys have pretty much said most of it, my opinion on it. The one thing I do like about progressivism that changes, and I think I'm more progressivist as a teacher than perennialist, is I do like the idea of working with problem solving. The idea of project-based learning is a very progressive idea, and I think that's the most effective way to learn art.
Yep, I agree.
Because with art, the best way to learn art, like if I just go, here's how you master a brush, and you have no problem to solve, you will forget how to do it. But if you have a problem to solve, and it's like, here's 5 tools you could use, here's how to here's a rough start on these. Let's introduce you to these, solve this problem. That's a much better way, I think, to learn art. Because you're critically thinking, and I think engaging the critical thinking that's where I'm very progressive. That step forward of thinking critical thinking is more important than rote learning is a huge thing. So boiled down, but I agree with Cory. It can lead to a lot of wishy-washy, kind of like hippie type classes, where it's like let's all hold hands and eat dirt. It's like no like yeah, it's like it's good to still have some restrictions and some structure. And again, like kind of going back to the little bit of me that's perennialist, I think we're probably all kind of in a similar boat. There's like while it is good to like gauge, I think a good lesson, like I think Cory does this really well in his classes, Scott does this in his comic videos, you know, I think it's good to reference modern stuff and more current artists and stuff, because art is not some kind of thing that only happened with these old men, you know, back in the day. But I also do think sometimes there are some key, like if you're learning about comics, there are some key cartoonists you should learn about, right? And it would be kind of a shame to only focus on the guys working now and not look at the people who influence them, right? So yeah, but I would say of the two, I think the progressivist approach of approaching a classroom that is not like all students will follow this exact structure in this exact way is much more embracing of diversity, and so I like that idea. Okay, let's get into behaviorism. Real quick, I'm going to blast through these last ones. I think those first two are kind of the big contrast in philosophy. Almost all modern education is based on progressivism, with possibly a little bit of perennialism. Predictability and control of human behavior are paramount concepts. So the idea of behaviorism is behaviors have cause, learning is behavior. Organisms seek positive reinforcement and avoid negative. This is the crap sandwich philosophy of teaching. And students will learn best by the use of carefully planned schedules of reinforcement. Behaviorism is a protest against the importance placed on things like motivation and IQ tests. Does that make sense?
How much of this does that relate to like behavioralist psychological theory?
It's very, very similar. That one's
okay.
It crosses over a lot. Like the progressivism one has some ties with progressive politics, but not much. But this one is almost like a 1-to-1. Yeah.
Because I find behavioralist therapeutic approaches to be effective band-aids. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of like if you've got an underlying issue and you take painkiller, you won't feel the issue anymore, but that doesn't mean the issue has gone away. And so that's how I feel about it from a psychological standpoint. Is I can teach somebody the forms of what looks like empathy. It's like, you need to nod your head. You need to make eye contact. You need to reduce the amount of blinking that you're doing. You need to lean forward in your chair. You need to practice mirroring, with those types of things. And then people will feel like you are connecting with them, but that person still might be a sociopath.
Yep.
And so,
that's true.
So if it aligns with that, a pure focus on behavior without a structural focus on the foundations of what causes that behavior and what causes people to interpret those types of behaviors in a specific way, I think is a dangerous way of thinking. Yeah,
I agree with you. What do you think, Scott? Does this one even make sense?
I agree with Cory.
Yeah. I agree with Cory too. The one thing that's nice about behavioralism, like this is the fun thing about this, is I think we'll end up having little snippets. One thing that's fun about philosophy is you have a little bit of each and maybe more heavily on one, but I do have a little bit of a behavioralist, and I still agree with, even as a manager or anything like that, carrots and sticks. That's an old saying. You can't beat carrots and sticks. Like we've tried to create classroom settings. They've tried to create college classes where there's no grading, and grading sucks. Like most teachers in college would be like, saying what Scott said. No one cares about, especially art. No one cares about your degree, right? They don't. They're going to care about your portfolio when you get out of college and your skill set. That's it. And so, it would be nice if you could teach an art class where there's no grading for assignments. Because at the end of the day, I've told kids this too, you should care less about whether you got an A than that you made portfolio worthy work, right? Because an A doesn't mean anything. Portfolio worthy, that's something in your arsenal, Like an A is just a weird letter we throw on things to signify like that it was good, there's a lot of psychological studies on this, and they always end up defaulting to some kind of reward system. It'll be 5 to 10, whatever it is. There needs to be some kind of system of grading to motivate people, and I do think that's one of those rewards versus punishments that behavioralists kind of write about. But I don't think that's the point of education, right? I'll kind of just go into. Oh my goodness. I'll kind of bullet point the last. You know what? I'm going to skip a couple, and we'll just go to the last one, which is. And now I'm forgetting what it's called. And my internet is frozen because I had a nice list.
I was going to say, are you doing this from memory?
Well, I was doing a lot of it from memory. But let's see.
I've never even heard half or any of these like in this form, so this is really interesting.
Well, it's great because like I never heard it either, and I had to write a teaching philosophy paper to teach college, and it would have been useful. Right. Anyway, so the last one I think is called essentialism. I'm going to just skip over the other two. Like the social one is like the idea that teaching, your responsibility is to create citizens that will revolutionize society as the priority of teaching, and that teaching would be a method of overthrowing bad power structures, and that's the primary function.
Is that a Marxist?
It's both Marxist and I mean it goes for like any sort of extremist. And there are teachers who do that. They're not all Marxists. Some of them will feel like yeah. Some of them will be ANCAPs, you know.
Yeah.
And you'll meet teachers who believe that. You know, I again, I'm weird where I think maybe that's like, I do think an educated populace can change the world. And I do think that teaching people to think and rationalize and critically think does create informed citizenry who can overthrow corrupt systems. But I don't think that's the primary function of education. But I do think there's some truth to it. What do you guys think?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, I probably wouldn't have read 1984 or Animal Farm if somebody didn't make me. And so it's useful.
Yeah. It's useful.
Yeah,
it's useful to know these things, but I don't know I think if it's the primary function, you might be not teaching, you might be running a political campaign.
Yeah, but I do think one of the values specifically of higher education, there's a brain model by a guy named Perry that talks about one of the best things about the higher education is this challenging of authority and challenging of your assumed notions and opinions, and getting you to think critically about those types of things is one of the most effective ways to get you to use full mental faculties. So by the time everybody is 25 years old, we all have a fully developed brain, but we don't necessarily use the new abilities. And so there are a lot of people that are still in not dichotomous thinking, but you know, black and white thinking, where, you know, there's good and there's bad, there's evil and there's good and there's this and there's that, and there's no nuance and nothing in between. They actually physically have the ability to think in a more nuanced way, but have never been challenged to think in a more nuanced way. And so I don't think this is the point of education, to cause political rebellion, but I do think the idea of having your ideas challenged in a systematic way, so that you can analyze them, deconstruct them, and rebirth them anew in a way that fits the new version of you as an adult, instead of the amalgamation of your parents and, you know, those types of things, is a very useful thing for anyone, right? Is I would rather people have their own thoughts rather than the thoughts that they were given. And so it's the politics of it that I bristle at, but I like the general idea of challenging things and causing critical thinking.
Cool. I love that. I think that was well put. Scott, anything to add to that?
No, I think Cory said it best.
Okay, I'm going to blast through the last one. I forget the term for it. Forgive me. I lost the notes that I had, so I'm just spitballing a lot of these. But this one is, I can't remember the term for it, which sucks. But again, like I said at the top, I'm not really a big terms guy. I'm a meaning guy. You know,
there was an existentialist one, right?
Yeah, existentialist is about teaching being a way to teach meaning. Which I think that's pretty much the gist of it, is to create people who think about meaning. And I would put that pretty highly prioritized there. What do you think?
Yep, I agree.
Scott,
what was the one that you were just about to say? Sorry, I cut you off.
Okay, this one I think is interesting because this ties into art more importantly than anything, and this tends to be a real divide in the art world. And the gist of it is, the basis of education should be strictly to get professional work and paid work, period.
So trade school.
Yeah, but like if you go to a public institution, there's a bunch of people who believe this. CTE courses are usually kind of structured around this in high schools, where it's just like, hey, let's job train. And now, don't get me wrong, not all CTE teachers think that's the end-all be-all of teaching, but that is a teaching philosophy a lot of people will align heavily with. So what do you guys think? Should teaching be primarily, like, the 100% focus of teaching is, getting work?
I think there is a huge detriment to our society as a whole by not respecting tradecraft. I think the idea of skilled labor is really highly important, and I don't think higher education is for everyone. And I wish that we had a better system for apprenticeship of electricians and plumbers and those types of things, because there is no more value or honor in having a bunch of letters after your name than being able to wire a home properly so that it doesn't burn down, right?
Yeah, one of my best paid friends is a foreman, who got in the carpenters union early on, worked his way up, learned the trade, the craft, and the skill, and I mean, he makes good money and has a good job, and he's a smart guy. Like, he has no less value than some art student with a BFA,
Sure, and he's adding significant value to society.
Yep.
That a lot of business people don't do, and so I have an issue with completely rejecting this outright, and I think kind of like all of these, I think making it holistically everything is a problem in its own right. But I wish in higher education there is a more clear path to trade school, so that we could have this conversation early on, and not in an insulting way, but almost in a complimentary way of like, hey, it seems like this isn't for you. Do you know that there's this awesome thing where you could be done in 18 months and immediately start making $75,000 a year, like straight out of this certification program? And it seems like the way that you learn would actually fit better into this situation than into this other situation. And if all things being equal, and if everyone in society could agree that labor is valuable when it adds value, rather than labor is valuable when certain people value it because of who you are, or what kind of specialties or whatever, those types of things, and then people that are plumbers are just blue collar or lower class or whatever. If it was just like, I am so glad that there's plumbers, so that I don't have to do that.
Money, man.
They do, right? And they're awesome. So I like the idea of this as a solid option that in no way should be degraded or thought down upon. I vehemently disagree with this as the purpose of education, because I think it becomes a very transactional experience rather than a heuristic experience. And I think heuristic experiences are one of the most valuable points. And so this is a term that I came across recently. I'm talking about a transformative experience, much like a caterpillar going into a chrysalis and coming out a butterfly. Education should give you the ability to be a better person, and however you define that, whether that be skills or knowledge or empathy or love, or social aspects or activism or whatever that is, education should be a heuristic process rather than a transactional process. So I have a huge problem when you apply this type of thinking to something that should be heuristic, but I want the option there equally valid and honored for the types of people that would actually be better served by getting in, getting out, and getting to work than like being forced through this Play-Doh fun factory so that we try to shape them into something that they're not and that they don't want to be.
Perfect example, the junior college near us has an excellent 2-year nursing program. 2 years. You go in, you come out, you're a nurse. Like, you follow all the stuff. None of the classes are going to get into theory. They might get into ethics a little bit because that's important when you're practicing medicine. But most of it's going to be like, here's how you find a vein, like basic stuff, actual skills. And you literally would get out and be helping human beings, in 2 years, and be making pretty good money for just fresh out of only 2 years in school. And that's trade, and that's available at a JC for $200 a year. That's amazing. And you wouldn't end up with a ton of debt. The idea of somebody invalidating that is really equally infuriating. Like Cory was saying, never invalidate trade or just disregard trade as a concern of students. Like, obviously, if you're going to art school, a lot of the time you probably do want to make a living doing art or make some money doing art. And that shouldn't be disregarded entirely. But I also agree with Cory fully that if you say that's the basis of education, then you've let then you've reduced all human beings to human capital, and we're just chattel. And I refuse to accept that humans only have value based on their monetary worth in some kind of money exchange system. And I think education isn't that easy to boil down. Scott, your ideas.
Yeah, I mean that I'm pretty much agree with everything the way it was said. I would just look back around and say it's not one size fits all. It's like if you recognize somebody has a knack for mechanical things or something, then maybe being a mechanic is the direction you want to steer them into. If somebody's like me is just interested in art, instead of trying to stifle that, encourage them to do that. If somebody, it's not a one size fits all. A trade school, and I in some ways I kind of almost think I know. I guess technically it's not, but in some ways I think of art school in some ways as a kind of a trade school. I mean, it's not the same. It's not the same, but I don't know. I mean, it's a specific discipline. Sure. You know, I mean, it does have. There's a little, bit of, I don't know, highfalutins about it for some people, the way it's spoken about or whatever. If you're talking about,
it shouldn't be highfalutin, but I agree with you. Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, it's just. It's not one of these teaching. It's whatever works for. And I get that that's hard. You can't. It's hard to like. That's I think the big problem is it's not easy for a single teacher to figure out what works best for each individual student and cater. I mean, that's almost impossible. In a perfect world, that would be great.
It's really hard for an institution to scale.
Yeah. But I will say this. And it's hard. Well, I mean, even, backing that up, like, you have things like Common Core standards and stuff like that, which I think are important because they're setting like foundations that kids should, like, if you're saying you're teaching art, like they should kind of roughly have these ideas when they get out of your room, I think that's good to have those standards, but it's hard to bullet point more kind of customized teaching, which I think most legitimate, decent teachers are doing in the room, where you'll be teaching and you'll notice, like, this is why I think in-person teaching is really valuable, right? When you're having people do a studio session and you walk around the room and you realize, like, one kid kind of needs to hear it in a certain way, another person needs to kind of have a different thing. One person responds well with Socratic ideas where you ask them questions and they arrive at it themselves. One of them just needs a yes, right? Some of them need a drill sergeant. Like, it's... some of them are neurodivergent and might need different methods of delivery, like visual instead of just audio, or written instead. You know what I mean? Some of them might be ESL learners, and so they need extra support with language and stuff like that. So I think what Scott was saying, it's impossible. You're right. It is impossible for a teacher to cater to all students, but that's also our job. So I think it's kind of sad that, like, all of our experiences of education growing up, I think from our generation, are from a much older model of teaching. I kind of am a little envious of some of the kids in school now, where there's a kind of newer look at approaches that kind of recognize divergence. Because I similarly to you, Scott, man, I got in so much trouble in so many classes for drawing on, when I was taking notes. And I'd take notes in class, but I just drew like funny pictures of my teachers and stuff on those notes. Why would you penalize? Like, from a modern teaching perspective, that just seems insane to penalize a kid who's paying attention and that's their way of absorbing information. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's very much encouraged in like kindergarten and in the earlier grades, but then they want to beat it out of you after that. So,
and I just think that's insane, because
and then don't do that anymore.
Because I've definitely had times where you have to go over material, right? And you walk by a student who drew a funny picture of you. It's like, cool, because for one thing, they were paying attention. You know what I mean? And they're absorbing the information. And sure, they drew, Mr. Kemble with like funny messed up teeth, and it's like, you're right, but you got my tooth wrong. Like, it's actually even more messed up. I haven't had that many bad drawings of me, but my point is, I think that's a valid way to learn, and you can't just kind of expect everybody to be taking notes the same way. But yeah, so we're at almost 2 hours. I had a feeling this would be a fun content. Did you guys enjoy it? Was it too heady? Was it too annoying?
No.
Too talky?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, I feel like it was a good conversation. I love your guys' minds, so it's always fun to like throw these things out there and kind of see where we end up. And it makes me think of really interesting things too. So thank you guys. Thanks to everybody in the chats. We had a really active chat. I will say to wrap what Scott was saying, 100%. Like, there is no one size fits all, and this is one of the reasons it's really important. If you're going to teach art, you don't have to 100% agree with these things, but think about them. Think about the different philosophies, because if you lean one way, right, or you lean more heavily one way, there's a whole bunch of research on methods of teaching that align more with a certain philosophy. Does that make sense? So if you're only teaching for careers, which I think are great as like a carrot, like a career is a really good incentive to get someone to be motivated to want to learn. But I don't think it's the goal, right? I don't know. That's where Cory and I probably agree. But anyway, my point is, whatever way, like, so I thought about these and I realized I'm kind of like pretty heavily progressive, a little bit of a lot of things. And definitely, I do think careers are important, like, right? I could go into it. Scott will go into it. It'll be kind of similar but different. Cory will go into it. It's going to be a little different. But the point being, it's important to think about these things, because if you're going to be teaching, you should think about why. And I think that's one of the beauties of education in general, is like making you think about, like, hey, why are you doing this? Like, you know, or like, what exactly is your goal here? What are you trying, like visual communication? A good art teacher is going to be like, hey, what are you trying to say? You know, like, what are you saying visually? And if you're not thinking about it, well, you might want to think about it, because you're saying something, whether you mean to or not, right? And same with teaching. What are you trying to teach? And you are teaching something, whether you mean it or not. And so, anyhow, hopefully that was interesting to you guys. I thought it was really fascinating, because, again, my whole time teaching college, we never went over any of this stuff. And we'd have discussions like this in like faculty lounges or something, but it was never like formally taught to us. And I always found that a little frustrating, like now, because I'm like, well, how come high school teachers are learning this crap? Like, I wanted to learn this in grad school. You know, it would have been interesting. Anyhow, so thanks, guys. Dylan, thanks for tuning in. Chris said great conversation. Appreciate it. Dylan also sounds like he had a rad math teacher, because he said my junior year math teacher said that it was good I was drawing in my notebook. See, that's good. Don't crush divergence, man.
I had a math teacher in high school that would give me extra credit because I drew on the margins of my math tests.
That's great.
I never had that teacher.
Yeah, Cory had that teacher, but he also had a teacher who like insulted his art and basically killed his love of drawing for 10 years. So
yeah, that's true.
You got to be careful when you're teaching out there, because Cory's an excellent artist, and somebody paused his growth as an artist just by like, you know, you're carrying a heavy weight.
I paused my own growth, but yeah, that was I used them as an excuse to do that.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's a bad move on that teacher's part too.
So. It was,
and I always try to keep that in mind too, because it's like you gotta, you know, you're dealing with minds here, you know, like, and you can mess those minds up. So carry that sword carefully or whatever. All right, guys. Thanks to everyone. Really appreciate you guys, and let's just close out and let everybody know where you can find us. So if you're on my channel, you know where to find me. If you haven't, hit subscribe, hit the bell to get notifications. If you want to give a super chat right at the last minute, pop it in there. But in the meantime, also check out Jacob's Apartment 2 Stories or my music. Cory, let everybody know where to find you.
Yes, you can find me at corykerr.com, and I would really appreciate it if you are reading my comic that you leave a comment. Let me know you exist, because I keep bumping into people in real life, and they are talking to me about this, but I'm getting like no comments. So it's like the number of people in this last month, it's been like 2 or 3 people a week in the last 2 or 3 weeks that have been like, oh man, I'm really excited. I'm like, please type words on the internet.
Yeah.
But also thank you for telling me in person. But anyway, you can go and check this comic out at corykerr.com/comic, and that'll take you there. If you want to subscribe, there's a button to subscribe. And if you're interested in seeing a population of hardworking insects that are suffering because of automation from an industrial revolution that's happening and how they deal with that, then you can kind of check that out, and maybe don't get too fond of the character that I was drawing today, because he's really annoying to draw, and I've probably decided I'm going to kill him because I don't want to draw him for the next 40 pages. So he's a good character, but he's a little too hairy. So yeah,
Cory's method of killing off characters he doesn't want to draw. I love it.
pretty soon it'll be like all of the characters that are just circles, and I'm like, okay, good. Now, yeah.
And eventually there's the Slack method and there's the Kerr method.
Yeah, just kill anybody who's too complicated visually, and that works out really well.
You guys should check out the comic though; it's beautifully drawn, and I will say, just the pages Cory's making are so beautiful. Like,
thanks.
It's worth looking at. All right, Scott.
Yeah, I've almost got a full issue done. So I got 19 pages, and I'll have another 5 coming out here soon. So
that's exciting. Scott, close this out. Before you close this out, where can people find beautiful vintage wax packs? Where can they find amazing, non-pretentious, and amazing instruction on how to do everything in comics? Since we were talking about education, I'd say it's probably the best resource on comics. I'm going to go further than YouTube and just say online. Where could they find that?
You can find that on you said YouTube. You can find it on my YouTube channel. You can find pretty much everything I do on my website. Anything I do, there's probably a link to it from my website. So just check that out. And just remember, just be prepared for Young and the Dead. The final issue and collected edition is coming soon to Kickstarter. I will keep hammering that point home until I have a link that I can tell you guys to go to, like a pre-order page or just a sign-up page or whatever, to be notified once it drops. So yeah, so all that stuff is available at my website. And this show, the Artcasters, it may be a different time for some of you guys because we just switched over to daylight savings time. Same time for me because we don't switch here in Arizona, but that gets a little confusing. We also switch back and forth from Josh's channel to my channel. So if you don't want to be confused, the best thing you can do is just join our mailing list. We don't spam you or anything. Actually, we may have a special. We're talking about maybe having a special gift that we'll send out to the people on the newsletter.
Should we just tease and explain what the gift is, or do we want to just kind of wait?
If we do drop it, we'll let people on the newsletter know. We'll send a link. But
okay, it's going to be great, guys.
If you've seen our intro, Jim Lujan took that kind of Artcasters theme song, the parody of like Axl Rose singing, and he created a full version of the song.
It's so good.
So we may at some point just drop that on our because that's not spam, that's like a freebie. So we may drop a link to that, and if you're interested, you can listen to the full song.
Yeah, it's the full.
But just a good excuse to join the mailing list and everything. Just join the mailing list. Like I said, we don't spam you. All we do is usually, hopefully, about 30 minutes or so before we go live, we'll send out a link so you know whose channel is going to be on, the topic is going to be, all that stuff. So you don't have to really, be, trying to figure all that out because it gets a little confusing with the way it switches around. But that's the best way to be notified because YouTube doesn't always notify people either. So just join that mailing list, and there's a link in the description of this video for that.
Amazing.
No, I was just going to say probably the same thing you were going to say if you didn't already say it, but thanks to everyone in the show. I wasn't running the show, so that's your job.
I love it. You guys actually rock. And Cory, it's great to have you back on. Always fun to have discussions. I can see why you're my brother from another mother. And Scott as well. All right, guys. Dylan said a whole song. Yes, please. I love the song unironically. So do we. And I have all sorts of things I want to try to do with that song. So thank you, Jim, for making it. It also made my day. It was hilarious, as all Jim Lujan content is. All right. Bye.